After reading Cross Volume 2 Family Values, I was reminded of a quote from legendary film critic Roger Ebert's review of the 1995 black comedy thriller The Doom Generation. In his zero-star review of the controversial Gregoraki film, he said, and I quote, "Note carefully that I do not object to the content of his movie, but to the attitude." These words rang through my mind after I'd finished reading Cross Volume 2 because they represented exactly how I felt about it. In a 2010 interview with Bleeding Cool, Garth Ennis expressed that although he himself had no plans to make another Cross story, he did see that the world had obvious franchise potential, and was okay with other writers telling their own tales of the Cross as long as they didn't touch his story or unique characters. He also basically gave his blessing to then upcoming Cross Volume 2 writer David LaFamme, saying, "As for David, who better? I think you'll see right from his first episode that he knows exactly what he's doing with the Crossed." I should have known what I was in for the moment I read this quote, but keep in mind that the only Garth Ennis book I've read for myself is Cross Volume 1. I was bracing for impact going into that one because of what I'd heard about Garth's work being revolting edgelord material. But once I was met with the surprising restraint and decency that was Cross Volume 1, seeing a Garth Ennis approval for Volume 2 made me feel as if I was about to get at least a similar level of restraint from David. In hindsight, I couldn't have been more wrong. Thankfully, there isn't much to this volume at all because I really don't want to talk about this trash for any longer than I have to. The story of Cross Volume 2 follows the Lincolnton, North Carolina native Pratt family as they try to find a safe place to live in the middle of a Crossed outbreak. It is not good. Although it contains themes and topics such as religious abuse and family trauma, because David LaFamme keeps his head squarely in the pits of hell, neither of these get explored to an interesting or meaningful degree. They simply exist to give the illusion that this book has anything other than shock jock antics on its mind. I'll admit that there were attempts at emotional and impactful character moments, but like everything in this book that isn't gruesomely violent, they're so oversimplified and blandly presented that most of them don't stick the landing. When I reviewed Cross Volume 1, I described Garth Ennis' characters as paper thin. By that same logic, that would make David LaFamme's characters invisible to the naked eye because they were so boring. I can't even call them generic or cliche because that would at least mean that they are something. At no point in all 7 issues of Cross Volume 2 do any of the characters come off as interesting, or more than half the time even decent. It felt weird because it's not like the characters are just standing around waiting to be killed. They make plans, set traps, get assaulted, make babies. Emotional stuff does happen, but because there's such an obvious lack of effort put into the writing of these characters, most of it falls completely flat. It felt like I was watching a Snyderverse movie, but worse. The one and only positive that I can think of when it comes to Cross Volume 2 is the artwork/art style. It's different and arguably better than Volume 1. Some of the proportions looked a bit off at times, but nothing serious. The characters looked nicely expressive and detailed, the action scenes looked good, and the colors definitely popped more here than in Volume 1. I'm sure that David personally made sure that the artist never ran out of red ink. So overall, I really liked the art style. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at our final destination. The one true reason why I decided to do this video in the first place, to answer the stupidest question that I have ever asked myself. Is Cross Volume 2 Family Ties really that disturbing? Fuck yes. If you're squeamish, I highly recommend that you skip ahead to this point if you don't want to hear the descriptions. Firstly, this story has incense. No, not that incense. Incense. Lots and lots and lots of incense. Issues number 1 to 3 heavily involve the father of the Pratt family, a man with a god complex who uses religious abuse to not only rule over his family with an iron grip, but also to routinely take advantage of his own daughters, one of whom, Kayleen, upon getting gripped by him, decides to end it all by putting herself in a cage with a crossed man. Unfortunately for her, the crossed man instead decides to grape her as well, getting her pregnant in the process. Father Pratt, being the wise man of God that he is, decides to keep his pregnant, crossed daughter prisoner for some reason. Fast forward about 9 months, Kayleen is about to pop. All hell breaks loose and somehow she gets free. She gives herself a C-section, rips out her baby girl, and starts to devour her. after which she received a long overdue mercy kill from her sister. The team of Vincents gets carried through all the way to the end of Cross Volume 2, thanks to the main villain of the story, Joyce, the mother of the Pratt family. We meet Joyce in issue number 1 as a broken, deeply traumatized, and brainwashed woman, staying complacent to all of her husband's evil deeds and blocking out her children's desperate cries for help were the only ways that she would make it through each day. Everything changed when the Cross attacked. While her family was busy being slaughtered and assaulted in the worst ways possible, Joyce went looking for her husband, who was suspiciously missing from the battlefield. She found him in the midst of brutally taking advantage of their daughter in the same cage that they had kept the Cross man. But unlike the tons of times that she did before, this time, she didn't look away. After making sure that her daughter got out safely, Joyce locks herself and her husband in the cage and pours cross blood all over herself to turn. She then takes a knife, slices her Mary Ellen to make it bigger, sticks the knife up there, and then Pretty Ricky's Father Pratt in the esophagus until she presumably climaxes. Just in case you thought all of the incense was over, in issue number 5 it's shown that Joyce not only survived the fire that destroyed the Pratt family home, but also rose to become the leader of a group of Crossed, a group that coincidentally captures one of her sons, Joseph. After Joseph is promptly R. Kelly'd in order to be turned Crossed, he quickly asserts dominance by biting off the fleshy golden showerhead that gave him his new existence. And then him and Joyce get it on like Cersei and Jaime in Game of Thrones. Last but not least, we have arguably the most disturbing occurrence in Cross Volume 2, which happened in issue number 6 and involves the character Eliza. After losing both her child and husband, as well as the ability to walk, Eliza essentially gives up on life, saying that she plans on going out with a blaze of glory once they see the Crossed again. Unfortunately, this did not happen. One day, Eliza's mind snaps, she grabs up one of the Pratt children and puts a gun to his head. When the others try to talk her down, she's all like, "No, you don't understand. It's their world now. By putting a clip in this innocent child, I'm sparing him." One of the Pratt brothers tries to grab the weapon, but Eliza puts a bullet through his head. Another brother comes right after him, but unfortunately was just a second too late to save Junior from a very messy late-stage abortion. After which Addie, one of the Pratt sisters, decides she's seen enough and proceeds to stomp Eliza's face in. While these aren't all of the disturbing moments in Cross Volume 2, they're definitely the most disturbing, so I think it's fine to stop right there. It's time to end things off with my overall thoughts, but just before I do, I'd like to make something clear when it comes to my feelings about the disturbing content in this volume. As egregious as the acts that I just described are, disturbing content simply being a part of the story isn't a bad thing. I know that some people are going to call me too soft or sensitive because my biggest problem with this book is how it presents its disturbing content. They're going to say that that's the whole point of the comic, for it to be shocking and disturbing. On the latter part, I would agree with them. That is my problem. The fact that this comic has shock value, and only shock value on its mind, is what turns me off so much from it. In conclusion, to be completely fair, after going through the 7 issues one last time to get my thoughts straight, Cross Volume 2 isn't all that bad. I think that the artwork is really good, and I also think that I was a bit too harsh on the characters earlier. Now don't get me wrong, I still think they suck, but I do now enjoy the brief moments between Addie, the main character, and her brothers. They're the only moments of the book that show good writing from David. They're subtle, well-paced, and entertaining. Everything that the rest of the volume is not. Over the years, I've watched and listened to a bunch of different media that included disturbing material. All of the good ones had one thing in common. They knew not to solely rely on their shock value, which is exactly the mistake that Cross Volume 2 makes. It reminds me of another quote from Roger Ebert's Doom Generation review. Content is neutral until shaped by approach and style. David's approach for Cross Volume 2 was to prioritize blood, guts, gore, and as much deviancy as the publisher would allow, while grossly ignoring the important stuff that's actually required to make a good story, like a good plot and well-written characters. It's cheap, lazy, and I 100% don't recommend it to anyone. Although, I'm sure that it served its purpose as some grade A edgelord fat material for Garth Ennis and his buddies.